piano. So thanks so much for coming. My name is Ed Gray. I'm the Director of Partnering Programs for Avid Technology. And I'm also the de facto accessibility spokesman for Avid. And it's funny, we were just sitting in another room trying to block and tackle this presentation, and it just became so interactive and spontaneous, and I'd like this presentation to be like that. You have a very impressive stable of presenters here, people that are heads of engineering and product line directors and coding advocates, and with a diversity of things to say, and we have very little time. And we also have a real-world demonstration by Jason, so you can see what's possible with all this stuff. So let me just start by just going down the line, just having people introduce themselves really quickly.
So do you want to start, Amy?
Sure.
Start that in.
Okay. So my name is Amy Dickens, and I have been doing PhD research into accessible digital musical instruments for the last 3 or 4 years. And I currently work at a non-related company doing developer advocacy. But I do kind of span the world of audio engineering into computer science. And accessibility is one of my specialities.
Great.
Okay. My turn?
Yeah, of course, Jason.
Okay, I'm Jason Descent, and I'm from Trinidad in the Caribbean, where it's quite sunny and it's not cold right now. Okay, and I'm a music producer, and I've been running Studio J recording with my wife, Sarah, who's right in front, for the last 19 years. And we're actually here in London now for the next year, where I'm actually doing my master's at BIM, which is the British and Irish Modern Music Institute. And I'm doing my master's in popular music production and music business. And I'm using this opportunity to rally all the manufacturers to make their equipment, hardware, and software accessible. And that's a little bit about me.
Okay, so my name's Carl. I'm a software engineer at Native Instruments. So from the technical standpoint, I led the NKS accessibility feature effort, essentially, at Native Instruments. I'm very interested in where accessibility fits in with software architecture. So essentially, how can we build applications, large-scale applications that can integrate new accessible technologies and non-existing new technical accessible technologies as well. I'll also mention that I'm a last-minute replacement for a great engineer and accessibility advocate, Tim Burgess. So I'm actually sad that I'm not sat where you are, because I really like to see what he's got to say on the topic, but I'm sure there'll be other opportunities.
This is being recorded.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so I'll hand over to you, Andre.
Yeah, so I'm Andre Louis, and I was the first VI in the world to get access to the Native Instruments ecosystem and look at its accessibility features, coded by Carl. And it's Tim's, to my left's, fault about all this thing. So I basically sold all my hardware, or nearly all of it, in favor of an in-the-box system called Complete Control. I am a music producer as well, and I gig with this stuff live, just my keyboard and a Mac. And I go out and I make music. I work in lots of different bands as a session musician, my own projects, and a bunch of other stuff. I recently just finished recording an EP with a drummer, working as his keyboard player, and we'll talk more about that later. But yeah, I'm an accessibility advocate, and I do some consultancy for various people at various times.
So I'm Tim Adnett, and I'm the Director of Music Production, also at Native Instruments, and essentially I was Carl's partner in crime when we started working on all the accessibility features as a product designer. So this is going back several years now, and something I guess we'll talk about in a moment. But I've been very interested in the topic of accessibility, especially within music technology, for a number of years. So yeah, we essentially kicked this off, and then, as Andre said, brought Andre in as the very first person to use it, and also Jason, and somehow I think everyone on this panel has been connected through this whole journey before, which has been really good.
Right, think about the diversity of backgrounds here and disciplines, and you realize accessibility is a mindset, and it's not just about people adding captions to something with voiceover so you can hear what's on a knob. You know, it's about driving more accessibility features into the tools, and then improving the website and web store. kind of updating your HR policies and doing outreach to tell people what's available. So it's a broad effort, and I think the engineers and coders are on the front line, and we want to make the case, it can easily be made, that when you are doing accessibility coding, you're not just doing it for the small portion of blind users. There were also partially sighted users, and there was also the idea, proven rigorously, that accessibility is usability. So when you program for accessibility from the ground floor, you're thinking through interface decisions to make the products more usable. So Tim, I was going to ask you to talk a little bit about the business case for accessibility.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the interesting thing about the business case at NI of accessibility is that we didn't have one to begin with. And I think it's important to say because it's often not the place that this whole thing begins. That said, of course, we learned a lot of lessons along the way. And I think just to touch on a few of those, I mean, a few things that I would suggest, even though not directly related to business case, but they somehow play into it, is this whole idea of starting small. So I think back to the very first prototype that Carl and I put together. It did very little, but by just making that first step and doing something small, we started to actually have a degree of kind of internal advocacy, I guess. And people started to understand what we were trying to do, which in a way seemed quite crazy at the time. In retrospect, not so much. So I think that was kind of one piece of it. And I think from a business perspective, don't be afraid of this thing. I'd also say, you know, this kind of engagement with the community is very important while you're building that up. So even just from a pure business perspective, making sure you're speaking to people in the accessibility community. So Andre's already mentioned, he came in, started playing with this very early on, long before we shipped it, and gave us a lot of advice. And again, that all kind of fed into this whole thing. And then the same is true for the developer community, actually. So I actually used to work at Avid, so I knew Ed from then, but we were in touch.
We miss you, man.
Thanks, man. So we were, you know, we were in touch pretty early on as well, and the same goes for a few people at Apple, gave us some advice and so on and so forth. So that was kind of all pieced together. And I think the interesting thing is that although we didn't have this kind of business plan behind it, and we didn't do it because of that, what we've seen, and I think this is an important note for everyone here who's thinking about doing this, is that actually it's really come back and it's really paid off. And we were talking about this backstage actually, also with Jason, how now we're looking at a significant percentage of complete control customers who are using these features because we can track them. And if you actually did the maths, the return on this is multiple millions. And I think the interesting thing with that is that whilst we didn't do it for that reason, what became very clear to us is that it's not a reason not to do it. So I think the main takeaway I would say is if you're thinking about doing it, don't worry about that part of it because it takes care of itself. It really does, you know, and it's a significantly sized community. Yeah. I think the other thing that's interesting is that this whole principle of accessibility and business case and so on and so forth, you can actually change the conversation a little bit now, I believe. Because I think the thing about accessibility, I remember someone saying to me, Ashley Elsdon, who I met through Heart and Soul, who are a London-based charity, he said to me once, if you design something to be accessible, it's going to be better for everybody. Right. And that's something I truly believe. And I think one great example of that, again, we were talking about it just earlier, we all say, hey Siri, very naturally. You go back so many years and this whole idea of voice control, oh, that's an accessibility thing. So I think the key thing here is that they're just different ways of interacting. So you don't have to put this on a business plan labeled accessibility. You know, it's actually just part of general interaction and interaction design. So I think that's another way of just thinking about it and putting it in mind.
The classic example is the curb cut. So they do a cut in the corner on a street so you can get a wheelchair up the curb, but it also works great for baby carriages and blind guys with sticks. So
right.
So all these accessibility developments have a wonderful way of spilling over to sighted people. And I am convinced, beyond a doubt, that when you use voiceover, for example, in Pro Tools, our product, that it speeds productivity, it reduces eye fatigue. If you try to stare at a Pro Tools screen for 4 hours, your eyes will pop out of your head. And so I would encourage everyone, even with normal eyesight, to try these voiceover tools in their daily lives.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think just taking what Tim just said there as well, that it does actually help everyone. is that we've run into some situations previously while designing certain things for the keyboard or something like that, and we realized, maybe not literally, but pretty much we would say, okay, so 5 key combinations to do this certain thing, and then we try and implement the accessibility for this, and then we realize, okay, this is very difficult to do, and we take a step back. Was it really actually the best thing for us to do at that point? Is it useful for anybody to have 5 key combinations to be able to, yeah, it's like trying to get a special move on Street Fighter, basically, to enter
the right combo.
menu.
So Andre, tell us a little bit about your early time with Native Instruments and kind of the experience you had and the lessons learned that might be good info for other developers exploring accessibility for the first time.
Well, when I went to Native Instruments for the first time, I took a cab to the office and I didn't know what to expect. I came from a hardware background, and the reason I mention it at all is because if you go to any music shop and you look at one piece of hardware from a developer, and you look at next to that piece of hardware another piece of hardware from the same developer, if you spend time learning how to use one of those pieces and move to the next piece, you will be unable to use it in the same way, because even though it's from the same company, it does not have the same UI. It does not have the same menu structure, and some parts of it may wrap. That is to say that when you get to the top of a menu and you press up further, it goes to the bottom of that menu. Some things do not wrap, so you don't, it's funny. So when I went to see Native Instruments, and I'd heard, unfortunately at the time, lots of bad things, this company was not interested in making anything accessible. I went in a little jaded, maybe, but I came away completely blown away, and I can safely say that because they're not paying me to say it. I pay them now. It's great. I mean, literally, I sat down at a keyboard that I'd never seen. I had a very quick tour around the buttons, and Tim said, right, load up this product and then see what you can do with it. And within minutes of me learning how to use the keyboard and the keyboard giving me some speech feedback, I was up and running, and it felt really like, and I wrote this down at one point, like a blind had been lifted in a dark room in a way. Because I could load, let's just take Massive as an example. Everybody's heard of Massive. And having never been able to use it in any way, shape or form previously to that day, I could then go and look at what any of the controls did on the keyboard and change the values that before may have been inaccessible to me. I could then switch over to Absinthe and do the same thing. And that is like going from piece of hardware number 1 to piece of hardware number 2, but with the same UI. So accessibility, in the way that Complete Control works, really is like the keyboard is a dashboard, and what it does under the hood, you might not have to care about. Of course, you're welcome to care about it, but the fact is that you don't have to. It's like driving a car. If, when you drove a car, it was the same dashboard as it would be when you flew a plane, then anybody could fly a plane. Of course, it's not. But it's that kind of thing. So I remember having a piece of hardware from a particular manufacturer, and I got an upgraded version of that same thing, but nothing I did on the new thing to do the same things I would on the old thing worked at all. And I was like, this is really a bit bizarre. So when I was able to get rid of a whole ton of my hardware in favor of Complete Control and start gigging with it, it was a truly game changer. And I think the last few weeks is kind of proof of that, because there I was in the studio with a Rhodes that I was using, and I turned off all the effect and the reverb so that they could record it dry and do everything in post as you would expect. And the guy said to me just at the last minute before we started to record the take, oh, can you quickly switch to a whirly? Now, in the old days, I would have to be that guy that would play a sound and press the plus key and play the sound again and press the plus key, because there's no other way to read the screen or to get into a category search to know exactly where I'm going to land. Mm-hmm. But in this instance, I was able to hit the browser with speech in my earphones not going out to the front of house, switch to a whirly, and call it a day. And there's no way to actually express how that makes you feel as a user until you do it.
Yeah. And I think, the Pro Tools and Sibelius accessibility efforts don't get past square one without a dedicated external team of beta testers that provide real-world advice and criticism. I should mention that one of our top beta testers I met when he reported Avid to the Better Business Bureau for lack of accessibility. So now one of our top testers. I should also mention Sam Butler is in the room. Sam, raise your hand. I can't see it. But Sam is the head of product for Sibelius, our notation program, and he's worked to drive accessibility into Sibelius on Mac and Windows, and has done a wonderful job. Work together all the time. We meet with an external team of beta testers. We maintain a list of the feature requests and kind of rank them, as you can imagine, from you know, must fix where it causes a crash to, you know, levels of severity, levels of pervasiveness. And then once that's done, we rate them based on the effort to fix them. And the idea is with any engineering sprint, we grab a bunch of the low-hanging fruit, a bunch of these captions you add, and then we dig into some meaty accessibility fixes. So Pro Tools is, and Sibelius are done with Agile, and we try to drive accessibility into each release. And it's really nice. And there are sightless people making records, you know, in New York City with Pro Tools HDX systems, and it's wonderful to see. I just don't want to run out of time, and I think so. I'm going to make kind of a random jump to Jason. Jason Dasons is here again. He's from Trinidad. How cool is that? And he's going to show you and talk about how all this stuff works together. And I should mention that you know, Jason, you know, we have varying levels of eyesight on this panel. I have low vision, so I see through a haze. Tim has normal vision. Let's give him crap. You know, Andre, don't know.
Nothing at all.
Nothing at all. Nothing going on. And Carl's has normal sight, and Amy has normal sight, and Jason also has no useful vision. So wait till you see what he can do. So Jason, please take it away.
Okay, so what I thought I'll do is I'll take you straight into the middle of the workflow, because anybody can spend 3 weeks preparing a presentation for this accessibility panel, and everything is going to work just fine, right? But I'm not doing that. I'm going to take a chance. Imagine that I invite you to my studio in the morning, I fire up a session, and I say, okay, let's go, let's see what needs to be done. So this is an artist, Julia Cato. She goes by the name of Jilly, and thanks to her for allowing me to use this session. So I'm just going to hit play. I haven't worked on this for a couple of weeks, right? So I'm going to hit play, let our verse and chorus run down for you, and let me make some decisions, and let's see what's going on, okay? And we take it from there. I'm going to do an 8-minute presentation. So here we go. Can I get some audio from the house?
It's not coming out, actually.
90% of the battle.
Oh. Is it right?
No, I'm still not seeing anything. Okay, here we go.
I'm just going to let the verse and chorus run down and see what I'm feeling. I'm going to put on your headphones.
I tried, I gave you a chance. I opened up, hoping you could be my man. You said the sweetest things that I have ever heard, but now you barely say a word. You make me feel like I would.
Okay, I think I'm pretty okay with like what's going on there, so I'm going to just jump ahead. Let me get to pretty much to the chorus where the background vocals come in. So here we go. Listen for the background vocals.
Black sheep, have you any soul? No sir, my heart is growing cold. All I wanted was someone to care for me like I care for them, to grow up with them, make generations with them.
Okay, so far so good. What I'm feeling though, so that's a bit of a kind of R&B drum kit that I'm using there, but I feel when the second verse comes in, I don't see why we can't introduce a bit of an acoustic kit. So let me go forward a little bit and I'll just play something in live. So here we go.
Jason, can you just state what equipment you're using?
Okay, yeah. So this is a perfect example of multiple manufacturers who have chosen to implement accessibility working together. So it's just like anybody else going out, okay, I'm going to buy a controller from Native Instruments. I'm going to use Pro Tools as my DAW. I like Waves plugins, and this is everything I'm using here. And let me just break a little bit to say that since I've been in the UK, I've been actually talking to several manufacturers who have been really receptive. You know, and among these, I want to mention a couple of new manufacturers that are coming on board, you know, and they did give me permission to say that they are coming on board because they've pledged their commitment to accessibility. I want to give it up for Focusrite. Is Anthony Nichols in the house?
Focusrite in the house.
They're on the hook.
Yeah.
Officially on the
Would
hook.
he please stand? Not too sure if he's here, but so that's Focusrite. Along with Focusrite, obviously, Novation. Right? Spitfire Audio.
Oh, yes.
And I expect to walk out of here today with a commitment from Rolly and Juice. Okay, so, yeah. So
Yeah, Jason is being humble. I mean, Jason is here on a grant from Trinidad. He's here spending time in Europe. He's had days at Native Instruments and Focusrite to help capture people's imagination on where you can get with accessibility. They've been pretty magical days and eye-openers. So Jason, you're doing a great service.
Thanks, Ed.
Yeah.
All started by you, of course. So.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to continue on. I'm going to go.
Event operations with
I just want to make sure the input quantize is actually off here. So
NUP 0, 0, 100, swing options, ticks, 0, oct, tiplet, 1/60, elastic arc, preserve note, quantize, pop-up button, menu 9, select input quantize, menu 9, press tick, what to enable input quantize, unticked checkbox.
exactly what I want.
Now in mix,
So-
kick, ins 20, ins track,
So let me name this track.
menu, stick, commit, bounce, record, new, rename ellipsis, clip, ins 20, select T, U, D, I, O, studio, K, I, T, now in kick, studio kit, ins
So
track,
I'm going to arm this track.
armed,
And if all goes well, I should be able to. So let's see what gives in the track now. So I'm going to go back just a touch.
Stealing my job, Jason.
Generations with them. So you wanna try to say something right now, but I'm looking at you and you seem so damn proud. You know exactly what you're doing and how you're making me feel. You make me feel like I wasn't good enough. Made me feel like I can't recognize good love. I knew it couldn't be easy, that it would be tough. I'm giving up. I don't wanna be that black sheep. Have you any soul? No sir, my heart is broken cold. All I wanted was someone to care for me like I care for them. To grow with them, make generations with them.
Okay, you get the idea. Okay. So
kick, studio kit, ins track,
let me just arm this track.
not armed,
So Andre, did that work? I know you're the drums man. So did that work? Okay, so
Definitely.
okay, let me just quantize this a little bit. Actually, no, whatever. It's just a demo. So
kick, studio, ins 20,
maybe a little acoustic guitar, perhaps. Any guitarists in the house?
menu, stick, bounce, save, record, new, rename ellipsis, ins 20, select C, AC, G, T, ACGT,
Okay, and here's Tim and Carl's hard work. I'm going to actually
ACGT,
load an acoustic guitar from.
menu 9 items, dip sound instrument, submenu, electric far, F, high, jump 8, complete control, stereo. Closing, close,
As you can see this
plugin,
demo.
complete control, window.
So here again, we have some third-party plugins. I'm actually using Structure.
Browser file types instruments,
Okay, so
all. Abbey Road 7, India.
how do you put this in user mode again? I'm accustomed to the S61. How do you put this in user mode?
Go over
Carl?
to the left.
Tell me again.
Go over to the left with your push the dial.
File types instruments. File types
Oh, no,
instruments.
No, wrong. It's page right. Page right.
Page left. Oh, great. Thanks,
right.
Andre. Yeah, I use the.
I'm an idiot.
User library.
Oh, great.
That's it. My mistake, sorry.
Products all.
Okay, I use the S61, the bigger one. So this is kind of like almost the first time I've used this
It's
keyboard
so
here. the
different.
M32.
Wave station. Poly 6. Structure. Types all. Guitar. Subtypes all. Acoustic. Results O2 basic 6-string acoustic.
Basic 6-string always works, right? So here we go.
Octave 0.
Okay, so let's put it in the track.
Minimize track. Reset settings menu pop-up button.
I'm going to close this window
Now
because I don't really need to see this window, right? So I'm going to close it. So.
Mix roads track bass in 6 soft lead in 8 ACGT in M1 track so mute 0.0 deep in -0.
Yeah, pull it down a little bit.
By the way, I think you get
-8
used to these voiceover commands and the clatter. It's like living near a train track or having a roommate that smells bad. You just kind of.
-11.5 -12.0.
Or like waking up your wife in the night and she doesn't talk to you for the next day. Right. Yes. She's just talking and she's trying to sleep.
All of that.
So, all part of the job. So, okay, so let's see what goes on here. Okay, let's see what gives.
No tracks are record enabled.
Okay.
Okay button. Now, Studio ACGT ins track. Armed.
Generations with them. So you wanna try to say something right now, but I'm looking at you and you seem so damn loud. You know exactly what you're doing and how you're making me feel. You make me feel like I wasn't good enough. Made me feel like I can't recognize good love. I knew it wouldn't be easy, that it would be tough. I'm giving up. I don't wanna be that pop black sheep. Have you any soul? No sir, my heart is broken cold. All I wanted was someone to care for me like I care for them. To grow with them, make generations with them.
Okay, there we go. So, little acoustic guitar.
Not armed.
Let's see what's going on.
Save.
I find I'm getting a little bit of a rumble here in the room. I guess maybe it's where I'm sitting, but let me just take a look at what's going on the master, on the 2-track mix, the main mix. So let's do
Menu
this.
bar app clip event audio options setup window tick dash MIDI edit score MIDI event MIDI edit task manage new workspace transport big count automate memory locations memory
Set up some.
window
Hey, Jason, you're gonna need
memory
to kind of
locations
bring it home.
in 7 8
Where-
show hide 8 9 10
Okay, I think this is my.
press 10 selected out of window configuration button
So I should be just showing the main
now
and
in
the master here.
track main mix
Beautiful. So I'm going to open the Waves Q6 EQ here.
And we're short on
Plug
time,
in.
Jason, just so you know.
See again, Ed?
We're short on time, so try
Okay,
to
sure. So, yeah.
bring it home.
I'm going to pretty wrap it up now.
select
So I'm just going to have a high-pass filter here.
FXTD edit in 2.0 dB 2.0 dB plus in high pass 0.28 hertz
So I'm
band
just going
1
to raise
increment
this to about
29
45 hertz and,
48 hertz
yep, whatever.
40 hertz out of
Okay, this is fine.
now in mix save
Generations with them.
Yep, so I think we're pretty okay there.
You know exactly what you're doing.
Yep, so it actually feels a little bit better to me there. It's probably not rumbling as much because I just did a high-pass filter. So,
track main mix
so for example, here, like if I were to just take a quick look at the chain, here you have...
menu 5 items tick volume
Okay, hold on.
escape button closing menu
So if I were to
track main mix
on the main mix, if I went here, you'll actually see the...
menu 5 items tick volume
Okay, you have...
expand control escape button closing
But yeah, just to tell you
master main mix
what is accessible. Here, if I go here,
inserts SSL comp
this is the SSL compressor that I'm just using to kind of glue the whole thing a little bit together, which is totally accessible. If I,
reset settings auto set track minimize close auto main mix B insert position menu 10 items insert B S press B insert position main mix track selector pop up
okay, so just showing you that.
Now in-
so everything is pretty much accessible here. I have some compressors and stuff on the background vocals. I have a couple limiter in, and pretty much I just want to tell you that this project will be completely recorded, mixed and mastered using Pro Tools, full accessibility with native instruments and several third-party plugins. And this is what I do on a daily basis. This is what I do to make money, to take care of my family, to run a successful business. So all doable. And yeah, so I just would encourage everybody to join us. This is a journey for all of us. It's fun, you know, let's do this together. It's not a matter of, I want you to make this accessible to me. I want to work with you to enjoy this journey and build it together, you know, so to just break down the walls of this is accessible, this is not accessible. In 2 years, I want to be able to open anything, walk into a store, go online, purchase anything. Okay, I love this, it sounds great, let me buy it because it's accessible. So this is what we're aiming for, guys, and thank you so much for being here. Ed, thanks for having me on board.
Thanks, Jason. Yeah, it's just, you hear me? Yeah, no, it's this sort of outreach. Jason, you're putting forth a great effort in visiting companies and spreading the good word, and we value it highly, so we're so glad you're here. So, Amy Dickens, I made it my mission in life not to allow you to run out of time. So I'm going to go, as I did in our last panel. So Amy is like a British national treasure. Every time I listen to her, it's like she knows 20% more about tech than she did last time I talked to her. She's just an amazing woman, has her hands in a ton of projects about accessibility and coding expertise. And this is effectively a coding conference, and I thought that Amy would spend a little time just talking about coding best practices for accessibility.
Thank you. Now I really have to live up to the introduction, right?
Yes.
Oof. Yeah, and I mean, if we look at the viewpoint of accessibility, a lot of us who are developers or engineers will often have the conversation of accessibility as a feature we'll add later. And I often talk to a lot of developers and be like, well, that's the wrong thought train. We should be thinking of it as a foundation. Because when you build with it as a foundation, you don't end up with a lot of accessibility debt. And unfortunately for a lot of us, that's not the truth. We haven't had this foundational approach, and we are facing a lot of debt. But the more you allow that to become a delayed time feature because of business needs or what you're serving, you're actually adding to that debt on a daily basis. So like Tim said, starting small, starting with something actionable. And the goal really should be, as you've just seen Jason demonstrate, like equivalent access, not something that takes a sighted user 10 seconds to achieve and somebody with a visual impairment 5 minutes to navigate all the menus that you've put up in barriers in place of it. You should be able to use something as quickly. I mean, Jason, you've shown me up, my Pro Tools skills are not that good. So I would be far behind you if we did a timed race. But there are many things, and it can be quite hard as a developer, like where to start with that stuff. I find I've worked in web standards a lot in my previous role. I was a web developer advocate. And actually, the conversations around accessibility have been happening in that forum for a lot longer. And a lot of that is portable to software. And some of it now is portable to hardware. And actually, one of the new specifications that's coming out is about accessible specification for technology. And that is talking about lots of AR and VR and hardware as well, because the web with IoT is now becoming a bit of everything, and you need to consider accessibility as a specification for all those things. And the foundation for web accessibility, for a start, is based on some principles. Is it perceivable? Is it operable? Is it understandable? And is it robust? So knowing that those are your pillars, like, is it available to somebody through a medium of all senses? It should not be invisible to all senses. So if you can't hear, is there a way to caption? If you can't see, is there a way for that to be lifted out for you in an audio perspective? And one of the things that I find when I'm looking at a piece of technology is I'm looking at the flexibility of the interface. I'm looking at how can I tailor this? Because approaching accessibility from a one-size-fits-all perspective just does not work. And one of the things that Native have done really well is allow you to have this flexibility of changing workflows to how you use them. And Jason, you mentioned that you're used to a different way of working, so you're navigating slightly different today. Yeah. But you can have that bespoke user interface set up the way that you want it and use it to affect everything. What was cool is that although it's a different keyboard that I was using, I just got this keyboard last week actually. Yes. But what was interesting is within a little nudge from
from Andre was equivalent to a sighted person in an office telling his colleague, his or her colleague, oh, it's control, oh, it's that, click that icon instead. So within, what, 15 seconds, yeah, I was up on, I figured, he told me what it was, and then it was just, yeah, it wasn't that somebody had to come and take my hands and move them across the keyboard. Andre just said, oh, it's the left arrow.
Exactly, it's that sense of agency, the independence. And sometimes when you, and this is a big no-no, by the way, when you update a piece of technology and it removes an accessibility feature, one of the people I was on a panel with at NAMM last year with Ed actually mentioned that there was a change in an authentication process, which meant he no longer had access to the dialog box as a non-sighted user.
Yep,
and it locked him out of everything.
Right.
His whole production workflow was locked, and he had to ask his wife or studio assistant or someone to come and do a task, and that takes away agency and independence, and it also just messes with somebody's workflow and day and time. And we know how easily we get frustrated when, I don't know, the internet's not loading and we can't get to the information that we need as quickly as we need it. And it's really sad when people just do that through lack of thought as opposed to intention, just lack of thought around that concept.
Yeah, I mentioned just making accessibility a first-class citizen, so when you ship a new version of Pro Tools, you have some standard of accessibility, and until those things are ticked off and verified to be working, you don't ship the product.
Yeah, I'd say the other thing that's interesting, I mean, you just touched on, it's an end-to-end thing. So it's very important, and actually, again, this is another one of those topics where it can make you create a better experience for everybody, because you have to think about how is this thing installed? You know, how does someone purchase it? How is it installed? How do they authenticate it? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I mean, we actually ran into some slightly hilarious traps that I won't divulge.
Well, the license management of everything has to be accessible.
Exactly, and you know, I have to say, like, you know, we worked very closely with the Native Access team. We did an amazing job of bringing that into our world. I guess about a year ago, I forget.
A bit more now.
Quite some time ago, but it is interesting because again, it just makes you think about that whole journey. And I think, speaking from a UX or product perspective, that's something you should always keep in mind, but we often forget. So
I can give you a kind of example of this, because in 2016, when I first saw Complete Control, although the software itself was accessible, the installation method was not. So my wife was delving into Service Center, and she's not tech savvy, and I don't know what to tell her to click, and we're having an argument about installing and how to do it, and that should never be the case.
It's like pulling up to a beautiful house and having a crappy mailbox at the start of the driveway. It's like the first impression of your home and where you're headed. And if that license management and entitlement stuff is not built for accessibility, it just makes it pollutes the experience. So
exactly.
You have to.
I want to say a quick word to the manufacturers on this. I mean, I know we're giving you a lot of good talk, but a lot of heavy talk as well. And this is not to in any way scare you. So nobody is saying that tomorrow your product needs to be fully accessible. We're just saying, let's get the ball rolling. You know, chat with me, chat with Andre, Tim, Ed, Amy. Chat with us and let's get the ball rolling, baby steps. But you'll be amazed at baby steps done constantly, you know, with a certain amount of effort, and baby steps become bigger steps, and before you know it, the product is 10%, 20%, 50% accessible, and so it's not to scare you that, oh, this is going to take so much time and effort. Is this really worth your while? It definitely is worth your while, and nobody's expecting miracles tomorrow, but the commitment. And the commitment that, yes, we're going to do more than look into accessibility. Let's put 1 or 2 people together on the team, to start implementing it. So that's what we ask. And, this is, I think, is the approach, is not to scare anyone into think it's this big monumental task.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And I think from a business case perspective as well, having done a lot of research on the statistics, you're talking about 20% of the world's population has a reported disability. That's reported. There are a lot of people who don't report disability because of the societal bias. And that's 1 in every 5, potentially, of your users. So if you were willing to close the door on a sale on 1 in every 5 people, if I asked you to give me 1 of every 5 pounds you have in your pocket, I don't think you'd be really that willing. And when you do this and you build that small bit of accessibility and you get people involved in that process, like Andre is one of the biggest advocates for doing things with NI now and like using that workflow. And it opens up worlds and it opens up huge use cases for this.
blind and disabled or differentially abled people and their user stories, they are some of the best apostles. They can be more powerful messaging than any web ad or anything like that. So, Amy, I wanted to ask you about something. Tim Burgess created and who didn't come to this, he couldn't come to this panel, but he created a list of web resources for people interested in getting started in accessibility. It kind of read like this: apple.com/accessibility, microsoft.com/accessibility. So I was just going to make the point that Apple, Microsoft, Google, you name it. Their accessibility content, their user stories and success stories, not only for visual impairment, but people that use eye trackers on the screen, people that have trouble remembering, people that have trouble reaching the keys on a keyboard. It's all there in buckets, and it's excellent. And they take that content very seriously. So if you're trying to dip your
login window, logged in JSON descent button, Pro Tools, mix, dictate.
Okay, it does that sometimes. Okay.
There's that roommate again.
Same to you.
Sorry about that.
Yeah, same to you. So that's a good place to start. Amy, are there any other web resources I'm missing? I guess there's the WCAG stuff for web accessibility.
Yeah, so there's the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines that you can find at w3c.org. That's a starter of some frameworks. But there's also the International Association of Accessibility Professionals, which can help you in getting people certified in accessibility if that's something that you're going to put money behind a training program, and also finding people who are potential test users, because that's another element of this. There is only so much you can do with your own budgets. Sometimes you might have to just test things in VoiceOver and different accessibility tools yourself, but the most reliable experience you can get is from having somebody who has this lived experience come in, walk through your product, and point out the obvious to you, because it's really not obvious to you, and then you're like, oh, wow, yeah. It's like what Carl was mentioning about doing a Street Fighter combo just to be able to access a menu. That's not ideal, and we sometimes often, like I say, it's a lack of thought about a process as opposed to an intention. And we can easily catch some of those things by doing proper user testing.
Right.
The next time you're in a restaurant, or even in your own dining table, look at your knife. And if you think this is a non sequitur, you'd be wrong. Because a lot of times you pick up a piece of cutlery, particularly a knife, and it has a round handle. Now, how do I know whether the thing is upside down or sideways when I'm going to use it if it has a round handle?
Yeah.
Think about that.
Yeah. There's a little thingamabob.
It's an inaccessible knife.
Yeah.
This is actually something that I wanted to mention, that how do I say this? I've had a lot of enlightenment, excuse the term there actually, from not just working with Andre, but Andre also, when he was in Berlin, he stopped at my place, crashed on my couch as well, and just being able to...
It was comfy.
And going for a walk with him as well, and just running into these potential issues that we completely take for granted, thinking about when there's a curve or something like that. And also as Andre coming over to Berlin and a tourist in Berlin and showing him stuff. Did we go over to the Berlin Wall as well?
We didn't do that this time.
Is the Berlin Wall accessible?
But more accessible than it was.
I just thought that situation with a knife, that's what you'll call cutting edge technology.
Hey, we ADC is strict on time, and we have effectively run out of it. Are there any one or two quick questions from the audience? And Sam, will you please just pick a couple of lucky questioners for the panel?
Hi. Yeah, this is mainly for Jason and Andre. Do either of you use any mobile iPhone or iPad-based tools? And what accessibility or lack of accessibility features enable or disable you from doing that?
Okay, I've been using a couple of them. I use a lot of stuff from Korg. So the Korg module I used, and it's pretty accessible. It's about 75% accessible. I've also messed with, of course, GarageBand a little bit. But I mean, using Pro Tools, I really don't want to use GarageBand. So my aim is, I'm looking forward to the Pro Tools dock with the S1 with the accessibility through the iPad. So I'm looking forward to that. I'm sure it's going to be accessible if Ed has anything to do with it.
I love the Korg IK Oscillator app. They were really quick to make that accessible. There was one build back in 2011 or 12 when it was rubbish. And then the next build, I wrote to them on Twitter and they said, oh yeah, sorry, our next build is going to be accessible. And I thought it was just hogwash. But they literally, between builds, it was not and then it was. And it's a really good app for sitting on a train or a plane just messing around. I love that app. I still use it now because you can export the WAV files into I use Logic. He uses Pro Tools, I use Logic. And they're both pretty much about as accessible as each other these days. So yeah.
And then there's the FM player as well, which is pretty much the X7 type emulator, which I like a lot. But yeah, I need to spend more time looking into it, but I'm sure there are quite a few apps that would be pretty accessible or could be easily made accessible. That's a great question.
Okay, one more question before they pull out the vaudeville cane and start pulling us off the stage.
Okay.
No, you're speechless?
Oh, there isn't.
Hi. Yeah, so a question for the developers. Like, I'm a mobile developer as well, and my first exposure to accessibility tools, unfortunately, was through writing UI tests, which I think is the same for a lot of people. Mm-hmm. But UI tests, actually, the way they work is very similar to what the accessibility features are designed for, searching kind of a hierarchy of components and trying to find something based on an identifier. So how much do you use in your products UI automation to try and catch the sort of regressions that we were talking about with the dialog box, for example?
Mm-hmm. I can take this.
Yeah.
Thank you for that succinct question.
So actually, unfortunately, okay, so the approach that we took with accessibility at Native Instruments, at least for complete control, was to make the hardware interactions accessible. So we're not using this typically used, essentially like creating a description of the visual elements, which is typically used, and then allowing the operating system to screen read that, which is essentially the typical approach to accessibility. So we do use at Native Instruments automated testing, and it also does go through the UI, but because we've home-baked essentially our GUI frameworks, then it's not going through these accessibility features. Maybe as a little bit of a side note, because this is also something that I want to mention, that so Apple and Microsoft, as Ed said earlier, have put a lot of effort into providing these accessibility tools. And one of the things that they have done is allow you to be able to essentially take the tools which are built into their graphical frameworks and then backport them to your home-baked graphical framework. So it's definitely something that we could do. But yeah, to answer your question, we're not going directly through this to test to our UIs.
And I think to add to that, the Microsoft accessibility, I think they have a kit, the usability kit, and that gives you everything from personas to what you should do on a guided walkthrough, to ways to do user testing, to all of this different things, because accessibility covers such a broad spectrum of things, and there are like disabilities that will impact somebody for their entire lifetime, and there are disabilities that are temporal. Things like one-handedness, sometimes you may have broken your arm or you have a baby in your hands and you have to test for those things. I'd love to meet the lady who's mixing something in Pro Tools with a baby in her arm. That's a badass lady that you need to meet.
If you have a broken arm,
yeah.
if you have a broken arm and a baby in the other hand, then
I'll be that lady maybe in the future.
Yeah. So, hey, thank you so much, everyone. I'm just really grateful for this hella distinguished panel. And we don't have any handouts or anything. We'll work with AEDC to make our contact info available to you. But this is our passion in our business. And anyone that wants to explore accessibility in their development or organizational change for accessibility, we're right here. We would love to have a dialogue with you. So thanks very much for participating. Keep an accessibility mindset in your company. It's not just coding. It's the web. It's the web store. It's HR. It's marketing and outreach. And whatever commercial gains or gains in your brand you think that accessibility can bring, you can quadruple it because it's much more than you think. Yeah.
Thank you.